Hi, fantasy readers. This is Karyne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. Today, you get 2 stories instead of just one, and that's because I pulled both of them from a fantastic anthology called Meet Me at Midnight. These aren't the first ones I've featured from the anthology because it is chock full of great authors and stories that you should check out. The first one is a cozy fantasy featuring a magical baker in training. It's written by Dana Black, who is an award-winning author of whimsical romantic comedies and other flights of fancy. Her short fiction has appeared in several best-selling anthologies, and she can often be found seeking out sunshine or haunting local coffee shops while dreaming up magical desserts. Paeter Frandsen, host of Christian Geek Central, will be narrating the story, so stick around to the end of this first story or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from both Dana and Paeter. For now, please enjoy A Crumble of Magic by Dana Black.
Sage Becking was buried under a mountain of profiteroles, and he'd had enough, thank you very much. Alas, there was no having enough pastry when your family made them for a living, and for the joy of it, and for the magic in it. No, being a baker was in the Becking blood, and had been since the formation of the world, or at least since Lairn had become one of the 7 Western realms. It was an honor to be a member of the Bakers' Guild, and it was an even bigger honor to provide the sweets for the Earl of Asterwood's summertime gala, which is why 13-year-old Sage was buried under a mountain of profiteroles, with only 18 hours left before they were expected at the manor house for delivery, and 3 more desserts to bake and assemble before then. The whole Becking family would be up all night. The bell tinkled over the door of the bake shop, merrily oblivious to the panic bubbling in the back room like the caramel sauce on the stove. "Hello?" a girl's voice called out from the front. "Be with you in a moment," Sage called, stacking the loose cream puffs on a tray so they wouldn't tumble to the floor. Where were his mother and uncle? They were due back from the market ages ago. Satisfied with the state of the pastries, Sage dusted his tan hands on his apron and strode into the front of the shop. "Welcome to Becking's Bake Shop, purveyors of the finest sweets and breads in all the 7 Western realms. How can I—" He trailed off as he looked up at the customer. His stomach soured. "Oh, it's you." "What a way to treat a paying customer," the pale girl said with her nose in the air. She had a fine hat perched atop her golden curls and what looked like new ribbons trailing from the brim. Cressida Alder was the poshest and meanest girl in their class at school. Her only redeeming quality was she wasn't training to be in Sage's Magic Guild. She was working toward the Clothiers' Guild, and Sage certainly didn't need any fancy clothes. "Sorry, we're closed. Private event." Sage turned toward the kitchen. "There's no sign saying you're closed, and the door was open," Cressida argued in her prim voice. She always tried to act older than 13. It was annoying. Fine. I can get you anything that's already in the case, but I can't make anything special today. We really do have a big order to fill, and I need to get back." Sage leaned against the counter and pointed to the display case, which was filled with an impressive selection of beautiful cakes, breads, pastries, and truffles. "That's hardly ideal." Cressida studied the case. "Mama will be so disappointed. Are these fresh?" Sage narrowed his eyes. "Of course." Cressida held up her hands. "All right, no need to snap, Sage. I'll take a dozen of the miniature lavender ice cakes, 6 cherry lemon dandies, and 6 ginger cinnamon scones." Sage nodded tersely and started pulling trays out of the display case. He put the lavender ice cakes in their own box to protect the tiny, sparkly purple confections. They were a bestseller this time of year, partly because they looked nice on a fancy dining table, partly because they were infused with a secret family recipe of sundrops, a concoction that both warmed you and created the feeling of a lazy day at the lakeshore. "Do the dandies have anything special in them today?" Cressida asked as Sage moved to the second tray of treats. He was about to retort that all of their treats had something special in them when she interrupted. I mean, do they have any magic? Sage's shoulders dropped down from where they had crunched by his ears. Oh, no, but I could add something if you want. He looked around behind the counter for the toppings. I've got memory sprinkles, sympathy syrup, and joy dots. Those are lemon-flavored, so they'd go with the cherry and lemon that's already in there. Yes, that will do. He pressed a sunny yellow joy dot into the center of each cookie, in the middle of the bright cherry compote. The dots shimmered as they settled in, making themselves at home. It was the perfect addition to the cookies. He always loved that part, when the magic just fit. He quickly finished packing up the baked goods, told Cressida the total, and counted her change back. Do you need me to call the delivery boy to take these home for you? No, Pierre is outside. I assume you'll be at the gala tomorrow? She had an unreadable look on her face. Sage couldn't tell if she wanted him there or hoped he wouldn't show up. Kind of a requirement when you're providing the desserts. Sage gestured toward the back room. Sage? A new voice called from the back, not his mum's. A second of silence passed, followed by a resounding crash, a squeak, and a quiet, "Oh no!" from the voice. Gotta go. Sage left Cressida to wrestle with her boxes and ran into the back room. There, in a heap on the floor, were his cousin Tashandra and all 200 profiteroles. I'm so sorry, Tosh kept saying over and over, tears running down her warm brown freckled cheeks. She picked up a handful of ruined cream puffs and stared at them like they were a scrying orb. I don't know what happened. I walked in and I was looking for you, and the next thing I knew, something bright orange streaked in front of me. I lost my balance and landed on the tray. She dropped the pastries in her lap and buried her face in her hands. I've ruined everything. Those will take ages to remake, she mumbled, then started crying again. Sage sighed. It was an accident. What they needed to do now was fix it. It's all right, Tosh. You didn't do it on purpose. Let's clean these up and get back to work. He grabbed the trash bin and started scooping up the ruined puffs. It's too bad we don't have a cleaning charm. He cracked a smile at his cousin, hoping she would feel better. Tosh sniffed and tried to return the smile, but failed. Her face crumpled again. But we're hours behind now. How can we get everything done by tomorrow afternoon? We'll come up with something, Sage said. We're terribly clever, remember? Tosh managed a real smile, and she picked up an armload of profiteroles. They stayed silent for a few minutes as they cleaned, Sage's mind whirring as he thought through the options. They still needed to make 4 batches of sugared lemon butter tarts with peace elixir to make sure no one talked about politics, plus Calliope Savoy's famous cardamom cake drenched in dragon's breath cordial for the centerpiece. Tosh was right. They were hours behind now, and he had to come up with something to replace the cream puffs. They were too fussy and time-consuming to remake. And where were his mum and Tosh's dad? Oh, they won't be back for a while, Tosh said, tossing the last of the puffs into the bin and cleaning her hands. What? You asked about Da and Auntie Amrita while you were muttering to yourself. Sage's cheeks heated. His brain moved so fast sometimes, he didn't always realize when words made their way out of his mouth. Oh. I saw them at the market on my way here. The whole place was buzzing with news. The Earl of Asterwood's son is visiting from Draven, and he's on some sort of mission for the Phanos. Da and Auntie got a summons to an urgent meeting with them. She gave Sage a knowing look. And Da said to keep working and they'll come relieve us when they're done. Tosh shrugged like it was nothing and wandered over to the wall filled with recipe books. But it wasn't nothing. Tosh might have been almost 2 years older, but she didn't pay as much attention as Sage. He'd heard all the rumors. He'd spent every afternoon and weekend working in the bake shop the last year to practice his magic, and if there was one thing people liked to do in shops, it was talk. Some people thought the Earl's son, Theophilus Savoy, was a traitor for marrying the young Queen of Draven, their neighbor to the southwest, but Sage thought he was a genius. Sure, he'd heard all the stories about how they'd fallen in love at that boring, non-magical school in Draven, but he knew there had to be more to it. Giving up life in a magical realm to live somewhere freezing cold and close-minded sounded like the worst possible thing a man could do. Theophilus must have been searching for a way to restore magic to Draven, and the only thing guaranteed to work was Queen Radika's legendary sun gem. It was rumored to have been destroyed by Gerard the Fearful when he launched his coup in Draven ages ago. But in Lairn, they knew better. It wasn't gone, it was just missing. The Fanos had been on the hunt for it for generations, and they must be getting close if Theophilus left Draven to join the search. That had to be the reason he was back in Lairn. He needed help, most likely of the magical variety. "A dream cake!" Sage shouted, making Tosh jump and drop the stack of recipe books she'd been carrying to the work table. "Stars, Sage! Are you trying to kill me?" She half glared at him while she piled the books on the table. "Sorry, I figured out what we need to make," he said, dashing over to the table and sorting through the books. The one he needed wasn't there. He moved to the bookshelves. "We need to change the centerpiece cake. Turn the cardamom cake into petite fours to replace the profiteroles." He pulled a heavy leather tome from the shelf. "And do this for the centerpiece instead." Sage flipped to the page marked by a rust-colored ribbon and pointed triumphantly at the recipe. Tosh leaned in and gasped. "Oh, Sagey, no. We can't make a dream cake. The magic is too complicated." Sage waved away her concerns. "I've helped Mum make 100 of them. Every Lairnian gets one on their coming-of-age day. I know the mechanics. How hard can it be?" He tried to ignore the pricking sensation in his gut, telling him exactly how hard it would be. "We can do this, Tosh," he said, more trying to convince himself than her. "You know I've never gotten a baking charm right on my own. I keep trying to convince Da to let me switch to the Horticulturist's Guild, like my mum, but he's so stubborn about me being a Becking." Tosh looked like she was going to start crying again, so Sage employed his second-best skill, deflection. "What if I promised you wouldn't have to use any magic?" He elbowed her. "You know how to make a regular cake, so maybe you could work on the cardamom cakes while I get started on this?" Tosh frowned. She looked back at the dream cake recipe. "Baker be warned, for dreams are fragile, precious things, formed in the depth of night to light our way," she read. "This is a bad idea. Who's it going to be for, anyway? Dream cakes need to be incredibly specific, tailored to the recipient." "Theophilus Savoy," Sage said, drawing the two words out almost like a hushed prayer. Tosh's eyebrows shot up. "It has to mean something big that he's back and gathering people for secret meetings," Sage continued. "If we're going to be members of the Fanos soon, we might as well start helping how we can." "We're technically children, Sage. What can we do aside from mess things up?" "I'll be 14 next week. That's old enough to do something, even if we're not of age yet. We have magic, which is more than the sad children in Draven can say. Maybe Theophilus is trying to restore it. What if he's searching for the sun gem? Wouldn't that be worth it?" Tosh threw her hands up. "Ugh, fine. I'll bake the cardamom cakes." "Yes!" Sage punched the air with his fist. "But," Tosh interrupted him, "you're going to help me with those, too, because rule number 1 of dream cakes is they have to be made at midnight. I thought you said you knew what you were doing." She rolled her eyes, then went to tie on her apron. "Right, of course, I knew that," Sage sputtered, hoping he sounded confident and not foolish, but Tosh could see right through him. She always had. Even with magic involved, it was harder to accomplish their goals than Sage had assumed. His kind of magic couldn't keep last-minute evening customers away, And they couldn't just close early when the next day was a holiday and people expected to be able to buy treats for their celebrations. Between the customer flood and the lack of adults to help them, Sage and Tosh had barely gotten the cardamom cakes out of the ovens by the time the clock struck 11. In the quiet of the empty shop, Sage closed his eyes and leaned against the counter, listening. It took a minute to find it, but eventually he did. The faint golden hum of magic. It whispered around him and settled on his skin and hair, lighting him up inside and reminding him of the reason for his sleepless night ahead. Everyone deserved the chance to experience this, and if he could do something to help Draven get their magic back, he had to try. Tosh banged back into the kitchen, breaking the hush of the moment. "Okay, shop is cleaned and closed, and I've packed up the remaining items for tomorrow. Are you ready for this foolishness?" Sage grinned. "I was born ready." "Good." Tosh nodded and held out a tiny tray with sweets on it. 4 perfect truffles, 2 rolled in cocoa and 2 dipped in pink icing, sparkled up at him. She handed him a chocolate one. "We're going to need these." "Smart thinking." Sage took the truffle and popped it in his mouth. Tosh ate hers more slowly, but now wasn't the time to savor the treats. The flavors of chocolate, orange, and coffee burst on his tongue, shocking all his senses. Tosh chose well. The awake elixir worked immediately, making his fingers tingle slightly. Tosh pointed at the pink truffle. "Save that one for just before midnight, when we need the most focus." Sage nodded. "If you want to keep working on the cardamom cakes, I'll let you know when I need help." Comfortable silence settled in the kitchen as they worked. Sage consulted the ancient recipe book as he buzzed from shelf to shelf. He'd watched Mum make hundreds of dream cakes, but Tosh was right. This was very advanced magic he hadn't practiced, and if he got it wrong, well, the consequences could be disastrous. One key element of the dream cake was the addition of hidden trinkets, chosen specifically for the recipient, which required a complex bit of magic. He needed several ingredients that reminded him of Theophilus. "What do you know about Theophilus Savoy?" Sage asked. He's got bright blue eyes. All the Savoys do." Tosh started mixing buttercream. The scents of cardamom and vanilla filled the air. "Blue eyes." Sage grabbed a bottle of cabbage broth and the jar of bicarbonate of soda and mixed them in a bowl. "His daughter is the crown princess, so something to represent her." "What about a splash of Princess Rosewater?" Tosh went and found it on the shelf. Into the bowl it went. Pink sparkles lifted into the air from the mix. "Perfect. What else is important to him? Maybe something from Asterwood?" Sage ran to the shelf with the herbs, scanning the labels until he found it. Garland bezel syrup, from a tree that only grows in the region of Lairn, between where they were in Heald and Asterwood down the road. He tipped the jar so 2 drops dripped into the pinkish-blue paste. It hissed and sizzled, and the whole mixture turned a weird gray-green color. "Is it supposed to do that?" Tosh asked, peering into the bowl with a grimace, then backing away. "Ugh, it smells rotten." "That's probably the cabbage broth. I'm sure it's fine," Sage said. He consulted the recipe. "Okay, 3 elements to represent Theophilus, mixed well." He poured the goop into a round cake pan. His eyes watered from the scent. It really was rancid. Nothing he could do about it, though. "The recipe says to let it cure in the oven for 10 minutes, and when it's done, we'll have the objects to bake into the layers of the cakes." Sage shoved the pan in the oven, closed the door, and prayed it would work. "Cake time," he clapped once. "We need 3 flavors, so I was thinking lemon lavender for one, strawberries and clotted cream for the second, and one more." "Raspberry and vanilla," Tosh offered. She went back to work cutting the cardamom cakes into tiny cubes. "No, wait. Blueberry thyme." "Perfect." Sage mixed the base batter for the cakes. They'd all start the same, then he'd add the different flavors in separate bowls. "Here's the tricky bit," he said, reading from the book again. We haven't already done the tricky bit? Tosh wiped flour off her forehead and retied her poof of nutmeg curls up on top of her head. Not even close. Once we have the batter ready and the trinkets are done, we have to place the objects in the batter and get them into the oven at midnight. Not before or after. We'll have 1 minute, or the whole thing could be wrecked. No pressure, Tosh muttered. You know, she said, waving a spatula of buttercream at him, plant magic doesn't have these time constraints. It's much more flexible. The horticulturists at school are always complaining about fiddly harvests. What about the moonbeam flower? That one is tied to midnight, too. And if you don't collect it on the right day, doesn't it burst into flames? It turns to ash, but that's not the point. The point is... But whatever the point was got lost in a terrible rattling sound, a swirl of acrid gray-green smoke, and Tosh yelling, "Sage, get down!" Sage dove away just as the oven door burst open, spraying putrid gunk all over the workstation he'd abandoned. Shaking, he sat up and looked at the horror before him. The clock chimed, only 15 minutes to midnight. No, no, no! Sage stood up. What happened? We'll never finish in time now. He knocked his fists against his forehead, and a chill seeped into his toes. 2 disasters in one night were too many to deal with, not on such an important day. If we hurry, we can try again, Tosh said. We'll have to figure out what went wrong and use a different oven. She screwed up her face at the mess and the smell, then inspected the damage. It looks like the cake batter is okay. We just need new trinkets. Good, but how do I fix the mixture? Sage Idris Becking, Mum said from the back doorway. What in the stars happened? Mum, I'm so sorry. We'll clean it up, Sage said, scrambling toward her. Mum waved him away. Messes happen in the kitchen. What happened to your bake? She scooped up a fingerful of the dream goop and sniffed it. She wrinkled her nose. Wrong combination? Apparently. You make dream cakes look so easy. How do I fix this? Mum laughed. It looks easy because I've practiced a long time. I've made several like this, too. This is for tomorrow. Who's it meant for? Theophilus Savoy. I thought he might need it since he's back in Lairn. Wise thinking. Mum glanced at the clock. You need to work quickly. Choose something related to his guild, something that reminds you of him, and something connected to whatever compelled you to make the cake. Can you think of things? Oh! Tosh ran over and thrust something into Sage's hands. Eat this! It was the focus truffle. Perfect. Sage shoved it in his mouth and chewed. Ideas flooded his brain. Theophilus was in the Cartographers Guild, so northern brambleberry juice would work. The Savoy blue eyes were well known, but cabbage was a bad idea. We need something blue, not cabbage. Tosh's eyes lit up. I know just the thing. She grabbed a jar of tea and poured out some blue flower bits. But we need the full flower. She pressed her fingers into the petals, and a perfect butterfly pea flower formed in their place. She handed it to him with a grin. Told you I need to switch guilds. Sage grinned back. Well, I'm glad you're in ours right now. Thanks. Only one more item. What had compelled him to make the cake? The sun gem. Candied orange and lemon peel could represent that. He mixed them all quickly and put them in the oven that had been waiting for the cakes. 11 minutes to midnight. They'd have 1 minute to get it ready. His pulse stuttered. Uncle Amal returned then, and they cleaned and finished the cake batters while they waited. At 11:59, Sage opened the non-exploded oven, holding his breath. The mixture had transformed into a tiny lantern, a compass that pointed southeast, and an oddly shaped mirror with a sunburst of orange and yellow gems on the back. Sage exhaled. It worked. 10 seconds, Mum said. Concentrate on your intention for the cake. On the first clock strike, Sage placed the items into the cake pans. He picked up the first batter to pour. I want to help Theophilus find the sun gem and restore magic to Draven. They pushed the 3 cakes into the oven on the last clock strike, midnight. A blanket of magic floated over them, bringing calm. He looked at his family, and they all laughed. Never a dull moment at Becking's bake shop. The next night, with most of the Lernian nobility gathered, Sage and his mother presented the dream cake to the Earl of Asterwood and his family. They exclaimed over the swirling blue, pink, orange, and yellow icing, depicting a perfect summertide sky. Even Cressida Alder said it looked nice. When Theophilus cut into the cake and found the mirror, his eyes widened. "How did you know?" Theophilus asked. "I didn't," Sage said, the true magic of the dream cake dawning. "I just knew I wanted to help you. The recipe did the rest." Sage hoped it would be enough. The warmth in his gut told him maybe it was.
I hope you enjoyed listening to the first of today's stories, A Crumble of Magic by Dana Black, narrated by Paeter Frandsen of Christian Geek Central. If you want to read more by Dana, go to missdanablack.com, where you can sign up for her newsletter and check out the rest of the anthologies she's been featured in. If you enjoy listening to Paeter narrate the story, you might also enjoy listening to his audio dramas at spiritblade.com or his podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self-proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. Next up, we have another cozy fantasy with a magical candle shop, written by Heather Tabata, who is from Kentucky but slips into a British accent at random times thanks to Jane Austen. For the record, I always ask authors to send me their preferred pronunciations from their stories, and sometimes that comes in the form of glossary-style pronunciation keys, and sometimes it comes in the form of a recording. Heather opted for the second option, and I just loved listening to her sweet Southern accent. So she should be recording podcasts. When she isn't taking pictures of clouds, you can find her on the front porch reading or crafting journeys that always end well. Stick around to the end, or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from Heather. For now, please enjoy Midnight Key by Heather Tabata. The little bell over the shop door tinkled as Mrs. Witt stepped out of the swirling sea salt air. She shifted her basket of blueberry crumble bread from her right to left arm, and the smell drifted across the wooden shelves of candles, hand creams, and perfume. Elise smiled up at the woman. "Good morning. I'll be finished here in just a moment." She carefully smoothed a label over the little ceramic jar, a thin layer of paste holding it fast. A hand-drawn sprig of lavender rested under the words, "Lavender Honeysuckle, Barrett's Chandlery, Kingdom of Marilon." Blinking back tears, Elise placed the candle on the front window display and finished humming a verse of Mama's song. She brushed a finger over the label and turned to Mrs. Witt. "How can I help you?" "Ah, just what I was looking for." Mrs. Witt's silver-streaked chestnut hair swung over her shoulder as she picked up the candle. "I adore this scent and was afraid it was out of stock." Her smile crinkled just a bit next to her eyes. "It's my favorite too, but that may be the last of it for a while." Elise rubbed a smear of paste on her work apron. "I still haven't been able to get the scent extraction and the blend right. It was Mama's guild secret." Mrs. Witt pressed a hand to Elise's shoulder. "We all miss her too." The door jingled again, and Sheriff Stolzfus swaggered over the welcome mat. His cane tapped a hollow cadence on the stone floor as the door smacked closed. "Well, it's that time again." His voice grated like gravel crunching under a wagon wheel. "Queen's levy is due. That'll be 125 pence. Elise's hand hovered over the jar. "Last month it was 120, and he was here 4 days early." The sheriff swiped a finger over a shelf, mouth pursed before he even lifted it. He brought it closer to his face, squinted, and put his hand back at his side with a huff. "Her Majesty's expenses are increasing, what with the banquet for the ambassadors and the Princess Royal's wedding." Elise might like to have a new dress or pair of shoes every month, but that didn't mean she could raise prices whenever she wanted. She took another coin from a second jar and added it to the rest. It still wasn't the full total. May Her Majesty rule long and well. The sheriff counted the coins and slid his gaze back up. The levy isn't optional. I wasn't prepared for it today. It isn't the last day of the month. He dropped the coins in a bag. I'll be back in 4 days for the rest of the payment. Surely a shop that is prosperous enough to continue will be able to pay the levy by that time. A gust of sea air rushed in as the door banged shut. Mrs. Witt held out the candle. I'd like to buy this, and I'll pay in advance for the next one of this scent you make. Elise worked her thumb in her other hand. I'll be glad for you to have that one, but I don't know when there will be more. The sun streamed in on shelves that, despite careful arranging, couldn't hide being nearly bare. Mama had kept the shelves stocked 2 high and 3 deep. But without the recipes and instructions that Mama'd refined passed down to her, Elise's candles were novices next to a master's. This would have been the year Elise could have joined the guild as a junior member, and then she'd know more than just the basics. Until then, she'd have to muddle on the best she could and pray that she made enough to pay the monthly levy. Mrs. Witt wrapped her hand around her basket handle. You need your Mama's box, don't you? If you could see her recipes from the guild vault, you could keep going, couldn't you? Elise's throat burned. Mama's polished maple wood box with a little lock on the front held all her notes on making the goods for the shop. Handwritten cards from Mama, Grandma, and 2 more generations back were tucked in there for safekeeping. She'd seen the box once, but only guild members were allowed to read what was inside. She swallowed, trying to make sure words would come out. I think I could. I don't want Jane and Andrew to grow up in the city working in warehouses. Even though her brother and sister were 9, they would be put to work too, and there'd be no more school for them. Elise glanced outside at the herb garden below the window. The sun glinted off Jane's wheat blonde hair as she carried her rag doll. She chased Andrew's stick figure knight, with its bits of silver-painted paper standing in for armor around the narrow pebble-bordered paths. Apparently, Jane's princess wasn't the one who needed to be rescued. Mrs. Witt stood a little straighter and set her jaw. As a member of the guild, I declare this an emergency. Go to the vault at midnight. Don't be late. You can open the door for only a single minute. With a deep breath, Elise nodded. Mama told me that the door will open then without a key. Does it just unlock and then lock back? No, there's more to it than that. I can't tell you the rest. But if you're able to figure it out, then the vault finds you worthy of being a full member. You'll be given a key and the complete support of the guild. Mrs. Witt tapped a finger on her basket. Just remember, you can't take anything out of the vault, so know exactly what you are looking for before you get there. Elise pressed a hand over Mrs. Witt's. Thank you so much. This gives me a chance to keep the shop. I can't stand the thought of Jane and Andrew not growing up here. Mrs. Witt smiled. You're very welcome, dear. Just don't be late. The bell tinkled as she walked back out into the street. Light from the street lamps scattered across the cobblestones, wet from evening rain. Elise's slippers splattered through puddles in the shadow of houses and shops as she darted around pools of light. 2 streets down from home, she passed the clock tower, waiting to mark the change of one day to the next. There was one more dull tap on the pavement after her last footstep, and then stillness. The back of her neck prickled with the eerie feeling of someone being nearby. She leaned against the wall of the cobbler's shop and held her breath, mouth open. If she got caught breaking curfew, she'd be fined. Without the money to pay, she'd be sentenced to labor at the docks for several days, and she'd have to close the shop until that was finished. The Queen's levy would be impossible to pay if that happened. The clock tower chimed a half hour to 12. If she wasn't at the vault at midnight, It would lock again until tomorrow, and there'd be no time to make anything to sell before the sheriff returned. Money, and who got how much, accounted for most of her problems. She lifted her foot to take a step around the corner and into the light. Another tap echoed from down the street, crisp and hollow. She held her foot midair and wobbled. With her fingers spread, she touched the cool plaster of the shop wall. Then she eased her foot down without a sound. The tap came again in a steady rhythm, growing louder and closer. Softer pats surrounded it. A cane and footsteps. The sheriff. Elise darted to the cobbler's shop. She lifted the wooden cellar door and slid inside. The hinge creaked a bit as she lowered the door above her head. Taps, muffled now through the thick wood, came faster. The door wasn't quite closed, but if she moved it, it could squeak again, and the sheriff was close. She scooted her feet more squarely onto the rock step. "Who goes there? 'Tis after curfew," he called. "Show yourself, and the crown may show mercy." The cane rapped closer and closer until it sounded directly outside the cellar. Then the dim bar of light that came through the opening vanished into heavy air smelling of dirt and ruts. The crown had never shown mercy, and never would. Elisa's arms ached with supporting the heavy door overhead. "Last chance. 2 days at the docks instead of 3. The sheriff tapped his cane twice and made a raspy sound in his throat. "Have it your way. When I find you, you'll wish you lived in another kingdom." The clock tower chimed 1/4 to midnight. A strand of hair stuck to Elisa's forehead. If she wasn't at the vault wall at midnight sharp, she'd miss her chance. The sheriff stomped down the street. When the last tap of his metal-tipped cane faded, Elise counted to 30. No more sound. Her muscles quivered as she eased the cellar door open and crawled out. A chilly, wispy mist materialized over the lanes as she hurried to the edge of town. Cobblestones turned into a dirt path that wound through the forest toward the capital. Just before the dense cover of trees, an old stone wall formed a square, too tall to see over, that held the guild vault. Everyone knew it was here, but only members of the guild were allowed inside. A faint echo of the midnight bells knelled from the tower as Elise pressed a hand to the wall. Her ragged breathing muffled a faint melody coming from the stones. She ran her hands along the wall, searching for the door. Her fingertips brushed damp moss and crusty lichen in the crevices of the stone, but she couldn't find the door. The same tune began playing again. It sounded familiar, but there was no time to think about that now. She frantically brushed her hands along the wall toward the forest, but there was no door. She only had 1 minute. Where was it? The music grew louder, then abruptly stopped again. The tune wasn't finished, and that's where it stopped last time. She darted farther down the wall, and when the music started again, she stepped directly in front of the sound. The wall was only stone, but there was a tiny gap between blocks running taller than her head, across and down. This must be the door. She knew those notes. They were from the song Mama hummed when she worked in the back room of the shop. Elise caught the place in the song and hummed like she would have with Mama as she checked the edges of the door for a latch. There was nothing, not even a keyhole. The tune stopped again at the same spot, but Elise kept humming, imagining Mama standing there with her. Now was not the time to panic. She finished the song and started it again, but no more music came from the wall. What was she supposed to do? Then there was a scraping as the section of blocks swung in. Elise gasped and covered her mouth. This was the vault. A soft glow filled the area. Brick pathways meandered around flower beds and pruned shrubs. Scattered through the small garden were little boxes with roofs, almost like birdhouses. As she stepped onto the pathway, the door rumbled shut behind her. The first box had a picture of a spinning wheel painted on the side. This must be for the weavers. She walked past boxes for the potters, carpenters, smiths, and leather workers. In the back corner, in front of a stand of lavender and with honeysuckle climbing the wall behind, stood a box painted light blue with a sunflower yellow roof. It had a candle painted on the front. She lifted the lid, and inside were bound books, linen sachets, a couple small jars, a mortar and pestle, and a polished wooden box. She opened the box to a stack of recipe cards on thick parchment with careful handwriting in 4 different styles of penmanship. The top cards were Mama's. There was the recipe for her trademark lavender honeysuckle scent. Elise read through the instructions 3 times, committing amounts and the process to memory. If only she could take the card home. The notebooks were a sort of diary for each of the last 4 Chandlers to keep track of what worked and what experiments didn't go well. Elise picked up one of the sachets and worked at the drawstring.
"Who's skulking about in there?"
The sheriff's muffled, breathless voice came from outside the door.
"It's after curfew. Open this door."
Several hard raps sounded on the stones. He must be trying to break in. Elise grinned. The vault was protecting her.
"Is that you, Mary Robbins?"
He paused, and there was another smack against the wall.
"Nora Witt?"
He made that noise that was not quite a growl, but not exactly clearing his throat.
"I know I saw a woman go in there."
Elise ran the drawstring through her fingers. So, he didn't know it was her.
"Come out now and tell me who you are, and the Crown may be merciful and lower your fine."
Why did he keep suggesting punishment would be lessened? It never had been for anyone.
"If I have to root out which household is missing a person right now, I'll do it. But I'll demand the maximum reparations possible."
Another solid smack to the wall.
"Have it your way."
His footsteps hurried down the path as quickly as a middle-aged man with rheumatism in both knees could go. She'd have to get home before he got to her house, and that meant taking the long way around without the path. The door stayed closed. How was she supposed to get out? She ran to it and checked all along the inside of the edges. No knob, no latch. Maybe the song. She hummed a few lines, but nothing happened. She tried again. The sheriff would get to her house first if she didn't get out of here fast. She began another song Mama sang sometimes. With the first notes, there was a low scuff from the center of the garden. A section of the pathway slid away from a set of stairs leading down into a tunnel. Inside, a series of torches lit in succession down the walkway. Elise shivered, but hurried down the steps. As she walked farther in, the first torches winked out. She jumped and looked back. A mechanism with gears spun a metal torch snuffer over the next one and extinguished it. She'd love to study how it worked, but there was no time. Maybe, one day, she'd be back. The torches that had easily kept up with her slowed. She hurried on, but no more lit. Then a heavy wooden door slammed shut in front of her. A metal door knocker made in the shape of ivy bounced twice against the door from the jolt. What just happened? She knocked on the door and tried to turn the knob, but nothing. Bouncing on her toes, she looked all around the door. There was no way past it. Then, the torches farthest into the tunnel winked out, and a pair lit in the direction of the vault. The next 2 closest to her went dark, and another set blazed closer toward the way she'd come. She followed the light, but it was the wrong direction. The sheriff would just barge in her house if she wasn't there. If she was missing, he'd charge a fine for sure. Jane and Andrew would be terrified. Back on the path at the vault, Elise rubbed a hand over her face. She had to get out. Trying to slow her breathing, she leaned forward with her palms on her apron. Something crinkled in her pocket. She snatched it out and saw Mama's neat handwriting. She must have accidentally put it in her pocket when the sheriff scared her. Elise scurried to the Chandler's box, tucked the card back in, and skidded back to the opening in the pathway. She ran down the tunnel, and the torches lit in front of her, faster as she sped up. This time, the wooden door in the tunnel stayed open. Her legs burned like hot wax had been poured inside them when a set of stairs appeared ahead. She ran up, and a trap door slid open ahead of her. Slowing, she gazed into the shadows. Where did the tunnel take her? She stepped out onto the square black and white tiles. A wooden staircase spiraled above her. It was the clock tower. Her house was only 2 streets over. She opened the door, and from just outside of town, the sheriff's cane tapped furiously. Elise closed the door behind her and ducked into the alley. She ran through shadows to their back door just as the sheriff reached the front. As noiselessly as she could, she tiptoed up the stairs to her room as he pounded on the door.
"Show yourself, everyone who is inside!"
Elise threw on a shawl and lit a candle. "Just a moment," she called as she walked past an open bedroom door. Andrew sprawled across the bed, one arm hanging off the edge. Jane's wide eyes stared back at her. Elise held up a finger to her mouth and winked. Then she hurried back down the stairs, taking pins out of her hair so it tumbled free. She opened the door and squinted. "Can I help you, Sheriff? My brother and sister are trying to sleep upstairs." His face turned bright red in the dim light.
"Did you manage to get into the guild vault tonight?"
"What do you mean?" Elise rested a hand on the front candle display.
"Someone was at the vault. I saw a woman, and none of the guild members seemed to know anything."
Her knees wobbled. "How could I get in? Only members can open the door." He peered from her loose hair to the long shawl hiding her dress.
"Ned Atkins said someone went inside his cellar just before midnight, and the description he gave fits you."
He circled his cane on the floor and twitched his mustache to one side. Elise crossed her arms over her stomach and tilted her head a bit. If he couldn't explain it, she certainly wouldn't help. "I'm not in the habit of sneaking into other people's cellars. As you can see, I'm here in my own house and would appreciate getting the rest of the night's sleep. I have a shop to open early in the morning." The sheriff rapped his cane twice.
"I believe, since I'm here, I'll just go ahead and collect the levy."
Elise's shoulders rolled in. "One moment." She ducked her head and turned to the counter. After she closed the shop earlier that evening, she'd checked, and there wasn't enough.
"Unless you'd prefer to surrender the shop now, rather than in 3 days."
The sheriff tapped his cane triumphantly. Elise paused next to the empty shelf that waited for lavender honeysuckle candles. The same shelf Mama put them on, with the same recipe she now had memorized. Jane and Andrew were snug upstairs, believing she'd take care of them. She raised her head, straightened her shoulders, turned to the sheriff. "I have 3 more days before the levy is due. I'm sure the artisans and the Queen's ambassador wouldn't like to hear that the amount was being required early, especially from a single young woman raising her siblings. At midnight, no less." He took a step toward the counter, but she stood in the walkway.
"Are you refusing to pay the levy?"
"No." She nested a hand in her pocket. "I'm agreeing to pay it when it's due." The sheriff made a grating noise in his throat.
"See that you have it."
He spun and stalked out into the night. Elise hurried to the door and closed it. Her hand shook as she turned the latch and rested her forehead against the smooth wood of the door. A giggle escaped her throat, and she pressed a hand over her mouth. She turned and leaned her back against the door. Shadows stretched through the shop, but faint bars of light slid through the windows. Her shop. To keep running. To keep her family. Tomorrow, she'd make a batch of candles. The next day, she'd advertise a sale and set up a temporary stall in the town square next to the ocean wall to draw more attention. And on the 3rd day, the sheriff would have his levy. She walked up the staircase, hand trailing the railing, to tuck in her 2 little people. I hope you enjoyed listening to Midnight Key by Heather Tabata, narrated by Karyne Norton. If you want to read more by Heather, find her on Instagram at Heather Tabata or go to her website at heathertabata.com. Make sure to sign up for the Finding Fantasy Reads newsletter if you haven't already. It's a great way to get notified when new episodes are live, but you'll also get easy links to the show notes, plus any surveys or early info like secrets about next season. And most importantly, at the end of May, you'll get the link to vote for your favorite episodes from Season 3 to reward the authors you've enjoyed getting to hear from. You can sign up for that at findingfantasyreads.com/newsletter. And hey, you'll also get a free bonus blooper episode. I'll have direct links for that and the other sites I've mentioned in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.